Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be part 3 in my video series going over Aang's Destiny, the deck building game for Avatar. In part 1 I did my unboxing, in part 2 I covered how to play, including a full game going over box 1 that ended in victory. Now part 3, what I'm going to be doing is, the first half of this is basically just going to be highlighting how do you start box 2. How do you go from I won box 1 to the box 2 stuff is now in play, and what happens when like box 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 come into play, what changes in the game. And then in the second half of the video I'll cover more my opinions having played through all the boxes, won the game, what my general thoughts are on the strategy, difficulty level of the game, tips and tricks, that sort of thing. So getting into how do you switch from box 1 to box 2. So straight away you need your box 1 and your box 2, and I'll cover what to do now. As your box 1 game comes to an end, your board should look something like this, where there may or may not still be water, air cards left to buy. There might be some of the support deck left. It might all be gone. It depends on how long your game actually took. But either way, the adversary cards should be all defeated, and these are the objective cards, should all be passed effectively. And you of course shouldn't be at 15 on the tracker to designate that you've won. This deck will be in some stage of half complete or something like that, and you'll have your deck for, I played as Aang and Katara, should be much bigger than you started with. That's what these two are here, Aang and Katara's decks. So, what do you actually do? The obvious thing here is you break out your little rules manuals and you take out box 2 rules. And I think it does a pretty good job at explaining to you what you do. The objective for box 2 is going to be the same as box 1. You have to defeat adversaries, and you're going to have to defeat objectives before the tracker gets to the end. It tells you all the cards that box 2 will add: 33 support cards, 7 reward cards, 9 objective cards, 5 Fire Nation cards, and 6 adversary cards. The first thing you do is you remove cards from box 1. So before you even take the stuff out of box 2, you've basically got to kind of organize box 1. What's going away now that we've finished box 1 and what's staying. Basically 99% of cards are staying. We're only losing a little bit here. So to explain this straight away, these cards stay the same. The Fire Nation cards here, the square cards that you flip over at the start of every turn, these stay the same for every single box. This is just a pile that will get bigger. Every box is going to add some amount of cards to this deck. You never take any out. So basically you just shuffle these back all together and leave them there. They're the box 1 cards. That's fine. Adversary cards. This is where there is some changes. The manual says that Commander Zhao is going to go away and all the other cards are going to stay in play. The reason for that being is if you look on Zhao's card at the bottom, you'll see that it says 1-1, meaning he starts in box 1 and he ends in box 1. So you get rid of him from the game at the end of box 1, which is what we're going to do. You'll note all the other adversary cards say 1-7, 1-7, 1-5, and 1-2 for Iroh. So Iroh will be included in box 2, but for box 3, we'll get rid of Iroh going into box 3. But otherwise that means there are at least 4 adversaries we'll keep and Zhao will go away. Just to highlight that, I'll leave him there. The bending cards are kind of similar to that in the sense that these will always be added to. You will never be discarding bending cards. So you basically just stack all of these up. This is also where you are going to have to take apart your decks. Of course, the decks don't continue game to game. So when you go to box 2, you are in essence starting a quote-unquote new game. Just with the idea that, hey, I learned from box 1, I know what I'm doing, I have experience facing some of these adversaries, I know what some of these cards do, but effectively you do start from basically scratch again. We'll get into it. With the tracker, it stays the same, but you put it back to 1, of course, ahead of the new box. The objective cards for box 1 will go away in full. The only thing to note with these is just the placement for all the reward cards that you got. You'll note that there's Appa gains reward card 1, Aang gains reward card 2, Sokka gains 3, Katara gets reward card 4, Aang gets 5, and Katara gets 6. What are all these cards? Where are they? Where should they be? So to quickly cover that, basically, the setup for the starter deck, so like let's do the starter deck setup at this point. You reset all the cards. So if it's a starter deck card, it goes here. If it's a bending card, it goes back in the pile. So Katara's water bending cards go back here. Tyro goes into the support deck. Oyaji support deck. Lychee, Kyoshi Warrior Fan support deck. She keeps Haru because it says Katara on it. This is reward card 4. And because it is a Katara card, that means it's part of her starter deck going forward from this point on. Helping Hand is a starter card. Waterbending Scroll is reward card 6. Katara keeps that going forward. Streaming the Water is part of the starter deck. Same with this, 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 and this. If you read the setup instructions here, right at the bottom, it tells you for box 2 what the starter decks should be. So for Katara, it's 10 original starting cards plus Waterbending Scroll and Haru. So this should add up to 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's Katara's starter deck ready for box 2. And we do the same with Aang. So that's a starter deck card. The airbending cards go back into the airbending deck. The waterbending card goes there. Kyoshi Warrior, Blubber Seal Jerky, they go into the support deck. Roku is an interesting one because the reward card says that Aang gets this card, but you'll note it doesn't say Aang on it and that it costs 8, meaning at some point it's going to be in the support deck, and the idea is from this point on, because it's 1 to 7, Roku just goes into the support deck from this point on. That's what that means. That's a starter card. Avatar State is a reward card, but it is a starter card for Aang, and the same with all of these ones here, which is fine. And then, so yeah, Aang's starter deck is 10 plus Avatar State. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That is Aang's starter deck, ready to go for box 2. This also means we have our 6 waterbending cards back ready to go, as well as our 6 airbending cards. So that's all set up, no problem. Then we go to the support deck itself. So we just take a look at all the cards here, and basically, in most cases, you're taking out a handful of cards. In this case, we're losing 1. The instructions don't actually tell you to get rid of this card, but you'll note that Shayu says 1-1, meaning he should be gone as of box 1. So the only cards you actually get rid of from box 1 are the Commander Zhao Adversary and Fire Sage Shayu. This makes sense because we're up to, I think, episode 9 as of the story. So Shayu is only in episode 8, so it makes sense that he goes away. So these 2 cards basically just get put back into the box. They will go with the book 1 objective cards back into the box. And that's basically everything with box 1 set up, sorted at this point. I'll also mention at this point that even if I was to continue my game where I've been using Katara and Aang, you can very easily just do box 2 where you switch up what character you play as. I could switch over to Appa and Sokka if I wanted to, because we earned the other reward cards. So Momo and Suki. Momo goes into Appa's starter deck. Suki goes into Sokka's starter deck. Even if you're not using those decks, they don't go back into box 1. They're still there if you want to switch characters at the start of another box. So these 2 would be considered part of those decks, and just to keep an eye on that's the location for them. So I don't have to use Aang and Katara going forward because we earned all the reward cards. The starter decks are going to be the same. We're starting again. The deck that we built in the first box doesn't matter. We're going to build a new deck for box 2, so you get to choose what characters you're playing as again. Let's assume we're just going to stick with Aang and Katara. So these cards are not really relevant right now. So yeah, we're just doing that. The setup for their boards is basically exactly the same. And then we open box 2 finally. So you just take out all the box 2 cards. There is quite a few of them actually here. It's one of the bigger boxes. And then we just kind of assign them out. There's obviously, it's pretty clear the different types of cards. So straight away, these square ones here, there is 5 of them. As you would expect, like I said, these just get added to the box 1 cards and you shuffle them together. Now you have slightly more of these. There's a bit better variety of them, and there's more. And that's that sorted, ready to go for the start of the game. The support cards we'll just put aside for a second here. And we'll deal with them in a minute. We have the objective cards for this box, which is fine. And again, just make sure these are in order. They're all listed down here. It's box 2, it says 2-1, and each of them should say like that they're 2-2 or whatever, and so on. So you can see here 2-2. And note that all the reward cards are in the right position. So reward cards 7 and 8, Long Shot and Smeller Bee. Reward card 9 is the Blue Spirit Mask. Reward card 10 is Frozen Frog. Reward card 11 is Zhong Zhong. And reward card 12 and 13 is Moon Spirit Yue and Ocean Spirit. And that is the final one for this box, Activate the Avatar State. So they're all in order. So we'll just put them on the objective location here to get ready for the start of the game. Then what we have up next are the bending cards. So you can see here, these just get added to the various piles. So there's 3 new airbender cards, they get added to the airbender pile. There are 5 new waterbender cards, they get added to waterbending. And finally, with box 2, earthbending gets introduced, and it just goes on the 2 earth slots here. And we'll shuffle them in a second. Then there are 6 new adversaries that get added to the pile. Again, we've gone -1, but we've gone +6 here. So there's a pretty big pile of adversaries here. So the game, as you can tell, is probably going to go like twice as long here because there's twice as many adversaries. And again, at the start of a game, we're going to flip over 1 adversary for box 2 again. So yeah, we'll just do all the shuffling here. So yeah, you shuffle your earthbending pile, and then again, 1 is available on the bottom and 1 on the top. We'll shuffle the new waterbending cards in, and again, 1 and 1. And the same with the airbender stuff here, 1 and 1. Then we get into the new support cards, which is pretty simple. It's just a selection of item, ally, action cards, and they get shuffled in with the book 1 cards. So you can see these 2 stacks get shuffled together, and the support deck has become twice as big, and this is going to get much bigger as the deck goes on, because you end up a lot of times like you don't take out that many cards, and especially in the later boxes you're not adding in that many new cards either. Like box 7 I think adds 3 cards to the support deck. There's a few like bending cards that go in, but this deck, the general support deck, only a few cards get added in. So yeah, we shuffle that, and then again we distribute the top 4 out onto the different slots, stacking them if required. And so yeah, there's the start. So you can see here, UA is a book 2 card, so there is one of the new ones there as well. And that is the game basically ready to go. You shuffle your starter decks, again remembering that you have a few new cards in there. Katara has 2 new extra cards, and all the other cards have 1 extra. And then the game basically starts with flip this over, that effect activates, adversary then goes, and the game starts as normal. That's basically the setup for box 2. Again, you could choose to start using different characters than the ones you did box 1 with, but it's completely up to you. Otherwise, very little actually changes. There's one extra addition I want to mention here, and it is a new mechanic that gets introduced in the instructions here. It's bending allies / reserved allies. So to explain this, I'll use Katara's deck because she has an ally in it from this point on. So you'll note Haru, and this applies to other allies as well, like Roku, who was out there. This is what we do with these cards here. So to explain this, I'll just quickly take out a player board to get this effect across. So yeah, wrong Katara, sorry. Yeah, Katara. And I do need the tokens to show this, I suppose. So Katara is a waterbender, so she has that token from the start of the game. And what this mechanic is all about is basically how do the other characters gain access to basically the other cards. Sure, Katara can technically use Directed Funnel, but she only gets the first effect. She won't, because she's not an airbender, be able to use the secondary effect. And the same goes for the earthbending cards, which is probably more relevant. For Rock Spike, she gets that first effect, but she doesn't get the +2 attack because she's not an earthbender. How does she gain access to them? Is she just restricted from them for the rest of the game? No. This is what this mechanic is. With ally cards, so Haru is an earthbender, you can choose to play Haru either for the effect on his card, or put him into reserve to gain sort of access to earthbending. And basically the idea is you kind of like just put Haru somewhere here on the board to designate that he's there, he's in reserve. We don't get the effect, but because he's an earthbender, he suddenly gives us access to earthbending. Now, Katara can use earthbending cards as if she was an earthbender, because the idea is that sort of Haru has sort of joined our player board. We're now playing effectively as Katara and Haru. And then as we add other ones, we could gain access to various different other bending forms. For instance, I'll actually use the Roku card here. There's also a Kyoshi card, another avatar. Avatars don't give you all bendings when you put them into play in reserve. You get to choose one of the 4 elements. So Roku is probably one of the few ways to gain access to airbending in the game. So that's nice if Katara wanted to gain full access to the air cards. Or firebending later on. But usually it's giving Katara access to earth just because in her starter deck she has Haru in it going forward. And so the idea is like, yeah, Roku could give her fire or air at this point, that sort of idea. The other way that this works is that at any point on your turn you can choose to, it's effectively like having another card in your hand as well. You can be like, actually, I want to use Haru's effect, so I'll play Haru from reserve. I lose the earthbending, but I'm using the ability of Haru here. So that sort of idea as well is present there. It is another card you do have access to if you want. The final mechanic with this to note is if you buy an ally from the support pile, you can choose to buy it into reserve. So straight away you pay the 8 for Roku, and he can go straight into reserve. The effect doesn't go off. Or you buy him and he goes into the discard pile, and then you can play him later for the effect or reserve. So you have a little bit of choice and flexibility with the reserve mechanic, but it is a nice one to add bending to the other characters overall. But otherwise, that's box 2. That's what box 2 adds. It's just a lot more cards and this ally to add bending to your other character's effect. So that's kind of nice. So, yeah, that's that. One final thing I probably actually should add about this is just with the support cards here, because we didn't really see this in the box 1 objective cards, is some of the effects have negatives. So you'll note this one here at the start of box 2. What we have to do is assign 2 attack and 1 purpose, but if you don't assign tokens to this card in your turn, you have to draw and resolve a Fire Nation card. So that's one of these cards. So that's like another negative here. So 2 of them will be drawn in every turn if you don't assign tokens to this. So if you ignore this objective, you're going to take more damage, lose cards, that sort of stuff. So then this one sort of forces you in a way to deal with it a little bit quicker. Which is interesting. And I think as you go forward, there's other ones that are like that. Until completed, the heroes will only draw 4 cards, but then you do get back around to this is a positive effect. If a hero assigns 1, they get 1 health. So you do have to be aware as you go forward now that the game sort of like moves past the tutorial stage and sort of like it's hitting more of its like normal difficulty, where like the objectives will have pros and cons depending on where they are. So some of your strategy for playing is definitely going to have to be about which objectives do you have to really focus down to avoid really hindering yourself, and in which enemies need to be taken out before other enemies, that sort of ideas. So that's that. So that's everything on box 2. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly highlight what changes in the game as you go from box 3 onwards. So we'll take out all the other rule books just so I have some visuals to show off here. So box 3, what does it add? The main thing is that obviously more cards get added, like here, new enemies get added, there's more bending and support cards, there's a new deck of objectives as usual, but also new hero cards come into play, which I think is fun. This really opens up the game, I think, box 3. You gain a new Aang card, so for instance, you can see here, the standard Aang is pretty plain, nothing going on, no effect. The only thing that's important is what bending he has on his name. But the new Aang, as of box 3, has an ability. If you play 3 or more bending cards on your turn, any hero gets to draw a card. Very nice. The Appa gains an ability. The first time tracking is reduced on your turn, any hero gets 1 attack. Katara's is a very nice ability. The first time each hero gains health on your turn, that hero gains 1 additional health. And then Sokka is, if you assign 2 attack on your turn, you get to reveal cards from the top of the general support deck until you find an ally and put that ally on the top of the deck. So he gets allies into play, with the idea being that Sokka, as a non-bender, wants to get bending allies to the top of the deck so he gains access to the full value of these cards, which is nice. In box 6, I believe it is, you gain the final forms of the characters as well, where you get a master ability, where it sort of changes, and Aang's ability is suddenly, if you play 3 bending cards in your turn, all heroes draw a card. I think Katara's one is, every time each hero gains a health, that hero gains 1 additional health, which is super helpful for the final few boxes. It's just, every healing on Katara's turn is just extra healing, which is really, really nice to have. So yeah, you gain the new character cards, hero cards, which is nice. The big new mechanic with box 3 though is that instead of facing 1 adversary, you end up facing 2. So when you start the game, there are now 2 in play. So how that works, of course, is you still flip your card. So all heroes choose this happens, then the effect of the first adversary goes off, and then the effect of the second adversary goes off. That's just how it works. It's resolved left to right. So now, all of a sudden, the adversary cards can sort of combo together. There is the potential for some of these to work in that way. What's a good one? Yeah, actually, these two is a pretty nice combination of that. So say Zhao and June and Nyla are in play together. Zhao says, every time an effect adds any number of tracking, -1 damage from all adversaries. So he's going to heal himself and whoever he's in play with every time tracking comes on. And then the effect of June and Nyla is that it adds tracking. So this combination is moving the tracker forward and healing the enemy. So it's kind of difficult to deal with, plus whatever the actual flipped over card ends up doing. So combos start to come into play, negative combos, which is quite tricky. And you also definitely need to keep track of, like, you don't want the tracker to get from 10 to 15. So 2 cards are coming into play because that's just going to compound the damage, basically. But that's everything box 3 adds is that stuff. Box 3 is, of course, the first Book 2 Earth box as well. We'll then move on to box 4. So box 4 adds a couple of things. As you can see here, Toph gets added to the game. It's also noted here at the start that Appa goes away. From box 4 onwards, you can't actually play with Appa ever again. Appa sort of, as of box 5, becomes a kind of ally card. So Appa fully switches over to being Toph. So Toph has a card, it has an effect. She has her own starter deck, so you just take those out and you bring them into play. It does mean that the Appa player is probably going to have to switch over to being Toph, or you might want to just switch around what player is playing as what. It depends on how many players you have versus how many characters you're using, that sort of thing. Again, every box is constantly with the villains and also the support, some of the support cards and this deck, swapping out stuff overall. So you get a completely new objective deck, some cards fall out, some fall out here, some come in, the usual thing. One of the bigger mechanics that gets added here is the dice. So there's one dice for each element that gets added in box 4. And it's just the idea that there are now effects that will say roll a dice. The dice are different. It's not just that they're differently colored, they are also weighted slightly differently. So you'll note the fire dice has 3 attack tokens on it, so it's weighted towards attack. The blue, the water dice, is weighted towards healing with the heart. The yellow dice is weighted towards card draw with the card draw effect. And the green earth dice is weighted towards purpose. So most effects, when you say roll the dice, the effect that you get is all players get 1 of this token. So for attack, obviously both players get +1 attack tokens. Healing, of course, is both players heal by 1. The draw one is both players draw a card, and the purpose one is both players get +1 purpose. If a card asks you to do something different with the dice, it will say what happens when each symbol comes up with it. So it'll specify what color dice to roll, or roll any dice. It's very, very simple when it tells you to roll a dice card. Like you can see right here, adapt like water in the rulebook, +1 attack and +1 healing, and then roll the water dice, and you just get whatever you roll on the blue dice. So in this case, we rolled this, so we get an extra healing, but also our allies also get +1 healing. You can see there, that's in general what the dice rolls do. That's all of that. And otherwise, yeah, at this point in the game, you'll note that, yeah, Aang's starter deck includes the Avatar State. Sokka's starter deck now includes Suki and Yue card. Katara has Waterbending Scroll and Haru. And Toph only has her normal 10 starting cards because it's her debut box, basically. So that's box 4. Going into box 5, there's, again, 2 main things that happen here. This is when it switches over to all of a sudden you are facing 3 adversaries at a time. And this is where the difficulty really starts to ramp up. There are combos when there are 2 enemies in play. There are mega combos when there are 3 in play. And keep in mind, new adversaries are going to get introduced, more powerful adversaries, but some of them will still be sticking around. So you can get stuff like, say, like that combination right there for box 5. Each time an effect adds tracking, the active hero is going to lose 2 because of Zuko's effect. Zhao is going to heal all 3 adversaries, and June is going to be the one actually advancing the tracking forward. And then if you advance tracking with this card, it triggers again because those 2 effects are each time an effect adds any number. So that would be that happening twice. So that would be like -4. This would be healing for 2 and everything. And this card is also losing another health. This is where it starts to get quite difficult overall. And yeah, at this point, Sokka gets the Solar Eclipse Scroll added to his deck, starter deck. And Toph also gets Sandbending as of this box. And then the final thing is a new ability gets added to the game to deal with the fact that, hey, there can be some really nasty combinations of adversaries, and that is the ability Deflect. So certain bending effects will have a thing that says deflect 1 adversary. What that means is just basically heal that villain, take all the damage off them, but they go to the bottom of the adversary pile and you draw a new adversary to replace them. So in exchange for potentially having to heal them, you get rid of them for later, which is actually really, really important. The only thing I would say is that there are some games where you can be in trouble with the combination here, but you almost don't have enough resources because of how tricky the combination is to buy the cards that have Deflect until later on. So it's a little bit of a kind of tricky one where like you want to focus on this and get a Deflect card early on if you can. Because again, it has to be one of the active cards on the board, of course. So just be aware of that also. But yeah, it's a new ability in play on a few cards. There's not that many, so you don't have to keep track of that much stuff. So like I said, box 5, mainly it's the 3 adversaries. That's the new addition. Box 6 is different again. This is where you change the hero cards to the final level cards. Zuko also gets added to the game at this point, meaning there are 5 characters you can play as. So again, because you can switch characters between games if you want, this is where someone can take over as Zuko, and you're without one of the other characters. You can switch around if you want, but just be aware of that. At this point for this box, this is where Aang gets the Appa card added to his starter deck, and Toph also has metal bending at this point as well. And yeah, they just note that it's now called a master ability, and it's more powerful than the previous ability. Zuko comes in with a master ability also. Otherwise, it's pretty much exactly the same, except of course the new objective deck. There's going to be some new adversaries, some of them will go away. There'll be new cards across the board here, including the first fire cards come in box 6. So the slot that's been absent for a while here, the fire slots, will finally get filled as of box 6, so that Zuko and then later Aang will have access to firebending cards. So that's the kind of main addition here is Zuko. You still fight 3 adversaries, of course, and master abilities. That's the only additions there. Box 7 is a little more complicated because it is the final box. Again, it's going to add a lot of new stuff, but fundamentally, it's still, you're facing 3 enemies. There's a new deck here. New cards will be added and all that sort of stuff. But I'll just open up box 7 to show you all this stuff. There are other stuff that gets added as well. So you get some new Fire Nation cards, of course. The new chakra deck is going to be added, which I'll explain in a minute. Note what the final one actually says. Finish unlocking all 7 chakras and defeat Fire Lord Ozai. And the reason that's kind of so important is because the Fire Lord Ozai card has a special effect on the top. May not be assigned damage until all chakras are unlocked. And note that his effect is roll the fire dice to get an effect. And if you defeat him, you win. 15 health. So pretty crazy kind of final boss there. But he's not actually too bad, especially if he's on his own by the end. The big new mechanic is the addition of the chakra deck. So it's 7 cards, one for each chakra. In order, of course, it's meant to be Earth chakra first and then Thought chakra last. Basically, what this mechanic is, like I said, it's just an extra thing to gain access to damaging Ozai right at the end of the game. You don't have to start doing these like really early on. There's no negative for doing it early or later. So most of the time I've left it until like right towards the end when Ozai is actually in play. Or when I just have extra stuff that I can't put anywhere else. The way it works is that you, for a lot of the early ones, it's about you need cards that roll dice, and then you assign the roll of that dice to this card to potentially pass it. So the Earth Chakra requires you to roll an attack or a +1 draw symbol, and if you do, you don't get that reward. Instead, it's just the reward is given to passing this chakra. And then once that's done, you move on to the Water Chakra, which says roll a heart or an attack. The Fire Chakra is roll a heart and roll a purpose. And then it gets to assign 2 hearts, play 2 item cards in a single turn, play 2 bending cards in a single turn, and active hero must discard 2 ally cards from hand and or reserve. So there's a little bit of setup that you have to do over the course of the game to be able to, I would say especially the final one, you need to make sure you have allies in play to get rid of the final chakra. And then the final mechanic here is because some of the early ones are about rolling dice, what it says you can do is for each chakra you've unlocked, you can sort of spend that chakra to re-roll a dice. So this mainly only probably applies for the Fire Chakra, is you probably have 2 re-rolls to try and get the Fire Chakra one going. But otherwise, it's a pretty simple mechanic that's just sort of like off to the side. Like they're just there for you to do whenever you really want to overall. And that's basically it. The only thing with Ozai, again, to highlight is that when he gets added to the deck, he is by default on the bottom of the adversary deck. So he doesn't get shuffled in with the rest of them. It's more like you shuffle everyone in play, and then he gets slotted in on the bottom. Similarly, if you deflect, they go on top of Ozai as well. So nothing can make Ozai like arrive earlier. He always is the last villain to flip over as well. And then there, just a quick note about one rules thing. Katara, as of I think the end of box 6, gains access to a card Bloodbending, which says one of the effects of it is that choose what it says basically in the reward box of any adversary and use that effect. You can't use Bloodbending on Ozai to just instantly win the game the second he comes out. He's kind of not allowed to be interacted with in that way, just to be clear on that. So that's what box 7 adds to the game, is just the kind of complexity of, you know, the chakra system kind of comes into play as just another set of objectives basically. And Ozai is treated a little bit differently, and that's really the only kind of main thing to kind of note there. So that's how the game kind of evolves over time. I say the most challenging thing is just the step up in difficulty as you go from one adversary for the first 2 boxes to 2 adversaries for the next 2. And then it gets particularly challenging with box 5 as you go up to 3 because of the combinations, and I'll talk about that more in the next section of the video. Should mention this, I forgot to mention this for box 4, but one of the changes that also happens in box 4 is that you swap out the initial 2 tracking cards. So this one where it says 1 to 9 draw 1, 10 to 15 draw 2. These are only for the first 3 boxes. They then get swapped out for these 2, which switch to 1 to 6 draw 1, 7 to 12 draw 2, 13 to 15 draw 3. So 3 cards coming off the top comes into play as of box 4, and that's in place for 5, 6, and 7 as well. So that's another slightly increased difficulty modifier that gets added on. But mainly what I want to talk about in the second half of the video is just my thoughts on, I would say mostly the difficulty and in terms of tips and tricks for the game. The main thing I would say about that is just to basically be aware of effectively what villains are in the adversary deck and what the worst case scenario is for combinations. Plus, I think the big thing is be aware of what each objective is and which ones are coming up. And I would say, like, as a group, if you're playing this as a group or just on your own, just have some memory of where the pain points are going to be in the objective deck. So in the book 2 objective deck, obviously the first 2 ones I think are kind of tricky. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you have to resolve another fire card initially, so you want to get rid of this one immediately, you want to get rid of the second one immediately, but you can slow down a little bit when you get to 3 because it's not a negative effect, and you can sort of like open out after that, but you should focus on getting rid of the first 2 immediately and planning that through. And then also, like, okay, when we complete this one, being aware that, okay, it's another positive 1, but then after that, you know, it's another positive 1, another positive 1, but then after a few positive ones in a row, remember that 2-7, Train with Zhong, has another negative effect. And knowing when that transition is going to happen so you don't get yourself into a bad situation. So just having some knowledge of what the objective deck order is so you can plan that out is kind of nice. And then similarly knowing with the adversaries that, like, okay, if in box 2 for instance there's only 1, so Zhao is in there, which enemy should I be worried about in the deck? I would say from this box, you know, again, Iroh you probably need to worry about a little bit, June and Nyla a little bit. Everyone else I think is pretty okay. But just in the first 2 boxes where you maybe don't have as much access to negative tracking cards, these 2 could be tricky, especially if you get either of them early. Or if, like, Iroh comes up first and then is followed by June, that could be a very tricky combination to deal with early on, unless you are playing maybe, like, say, Katara and Appa, or Sokka and Appa, who have I think, a few more cards that do minus tracking. So stuff like that is to something that you should worry about. But also would say the reason that's such important advice is because when you get to, for instance, like here's box 6, which I think is the most difficult box. Look at some of the stuff going on in box 6. So let me just kind of set up the enemies that are actually going to be in this box. So none of these ones. That's 7. And then, yeah, Ty Lee, Combustion Man, Azula, Mei, Hama, Long Feng. Yeah. This is probably one of the ones where, like, here's where some pain points are going to be in this. So box 6, so you're facing 3 adversaries. And it's probably the most restrictive objective deck as well. There could be some crazy combinations of like what the 3 villains do and then a restriction on objective that just mean you can't really play the game. So let's see what we kind of get here just as an initial combination here. Ty Lee, Combustion Man, and the Fire Nation ship. So straight away, like, look at that combination there. Fire Nation ship is just, okay, any one hero -1 damage. That's actually fine. That's one of the ones you don't mind really having on the board because you can choose whichever hero has the most health and manage that correctly. Ty Lee early on isn't super bad because you don't have that many bending cards in hand, but by this point in the game, especially if you're playing maybe Aang, Katara, you probably do have a few more bending cards. For each bending card in hand, the active hero has to either discard it or lose a health. So for Aang, who really wants to use bending cards because of his character ability, play 3 in a row and you get to draw a card. Ty Lee can be quite tricky to deal with. You might lose a lot of health or have to discard a lot of cards, so you might want to get rid of her early on. But then Combustion Man is 10 health, +1 tracking, and every time you lower tracking, the active hero loses a health. So every time you try and push the ship back, you're going to lose even more health. So your health's going down, your health's going down a little bit here, and the tracker is moving on. It's not the worst combination here, but there can be some pretty bad ones, especially when you factor in that at the start of box 6, look at the restriction on this if you're playing Aang. Aang cannot gain attack. So you just can't do any attack damage with Aang until you... Active hero has to play 2 bending cards of different elements. So Aang is the one where you're probably most likely to do that with because he has access to all the cards early on. So he has air, so you just have to buy one of the other ones and then have them both in hand at the same time. Still going to take a few turns where if I was playing 2-player a lot, like me and Katara, half my team couldn't do any damage. So Katara had to do all the initial damage until this one was dealt with. But then you get through this finally and you go into the next one, and that's such a devastating combination. For that to be followed up by until completed, players cannot like lower the tracking. So Combustion Man with this in play, really, really tricky. And it's like, again, those two following each other up of like Aang can barely do any damage, so you want to get rid of that as soon as possible, but then you're potentially like quite far along after a few turns of Combustion Man moving it along. Maybe some of these cards are moving it along as well. You don't want to hit on this one at the wrong time. So the early stages of box 6, you can really get yourself into a situation where you just don't have a chance. You really, really don't have a chance. Thankfully, the third objective is a positive objective, and so you can kind of calm down at this point after you get through the first 2. But then the fourth one gets back around to until this objective is complete. You can't damage the enemies. That's a really restrictive one. The rest of them aren't too bad. This one is like if you assign less than 2, you get +1 tracking. That's kind of difficult to deal with. And then the other ones aren't too bad. But this is one where I feel like that advice I gave you about like knowing what the order of the objective deck is feels particularly important here early on, because like I said, this isn't even the worst combination you can get. Like imagine, I think one game I got this, this was actually really devastating. Just Hama and Combustion Man alone are pretty bad, but I think in different games I've got this combination. I've got like May, Hama, Combustion Man, I think was the first time I played this box and lost badly. I think the next time I got Azula, Hama, Combustion Man. Both really difficult combinations because May rips an ally card from reserve or for hand. So for like Sokka, May is very difficult to deal with. For Katara, it means she's constantly losing Haru from her hand. She doesn't get to play Haru. So that can be difficult. Like it means like Katara is almost every second turn down a card. And then Hama is a really powerful adversary. -1 health, and then you discard a card but at random. This is, I think, the first and only card in the game that has you discard a card by random. You don't get to choose. That's devastating. Because on certain turns, these two work together, where like Katara now is down to 3 cards in hand, and you're taking damage, and then Combustion Man is moving the tracking along, and then you can't effectively fight back against that. Plus, don't forget that this is happening, and then if you wait too long, suddenly 2 cards are coming off the top of the deck, and everything is starting to get chaotic and crazy, and that's very difficult to deal with. Especially bad, I think this is maybe one of the worst combinations of villains. Azula, Hama, Combustion Man. Active hero -2, +1 tracking, and then +1 tracking from Combustion Man, so that's -2 health, +2 tracking, and then -3 health, because there's another -1 from Hama, and you discard a card. That is so devastating. And then, especially later on, even if you replace these with maybe one of the weaker characters in general, like a Fire Nation soldier, who each time a card causes you to discard, that hero -1. If you get him at the wrong time, he can come out and you can get some really bad combinations where like it's just this discard crazy kind of situation where like May, Hama, Fire Nation soldier is suddenly ripping cards out of your hand, and especially if like you get all heroes choose discard a card from hand or -2, that's vicious, because if you're playing Aang, you're restricted at the start, then you can't quickly recover. So management of just what you are doing at the start of a game like this is probably the most kind of difficult thing, because you have to remember at the start of this game you've got like 4 restrictions in place and a card coming over, and you're trying to deal with this with your starter cards. So very, very tricky, very difficult to know what to do. And so it means that the strategy for me a lot of the times in these later boxes is sort of, it's almost like hope, pray you don't get one of these really bad combinations. And that, okay, let's say it's not the absolute worst case scenario. Let's say you get something that's a little bit more manageable. So like, say you get Combustion Man, Fire Nation ship, and like, say Ty Lee. Still not great, but like, okay, it's manageable because you're just in general losing health. You don't mind that too much. Okay, Combustion Man's going to be here for a while. Again, just need to manage the tracking. And then Ty Lee just means, I guess I don't focus on buying bending cards, otherwise that's going to get in my way. I would say here, probably try and get rid of Ty Lee first, focus her down if you can, but also, again, you have to remember that this is in play, so it's like, and then the combination of these two, where like, probably you want Aang to do this, but you need bending cards in hand, and then she's going to try and take health away for that. But either way, you want to try and get rid of Ty Lee, and then maybe say a Long Feng comes out. A lot of health, but like each time a hero acquires a card with 4 or more, that hero -1. So when you buy cards for your deck, you lose a health. That's not too bad. And then all of a sudden, like, this is a somewhat okay situation where these two aren't super threatening. And if you can finally get past this and the second objective, you're pretty comfortable, because I would say by the time you get through 1 and 2, by the time you get to like there, for instance, this one's pretty comfortable. And then if Katara assigns to this objective, she does you a benefit on that card. That's comfortable, because I feel there's this you don't need to worry about, this you don't need to worry about, and then this you don't need to worry about. So you can actually focus on, you know, if things are getting bad with the tracking, on taking out Combustion Man to get a different villain into play, or if you've somehow managed to do quite well with getting cards that deal with tracking, and you're actually perfectly fine with, okay, 1 a turn. I just need to be careful when we start to get to like 6+ where the 2 cards are coming out. Then we can manage it, but I'm okay for now. What I typically would do when you start to stabilize is, instead of focus down individual characters, is almost like spread the damage around. Like, we're fine now. I'm going to build up my deck, build up stuff on the objective, but not move it along yet. Build up damage on the enemies, but not kill any of them. And get the Fire Nation ship to 1 more damage would do it. Get Combustion Man to 1 more damage would do it. Get Long Feng to 1 more damage would do it. Then all of a sudden we're in a nice position, and I can just decide whatever I want. Okay, Combustion Man's gone, and then maybe even something bad happens. Azula comes into play. These 2 I can get rid of whenever I need to. So if Azula is comboing with either one of these 2, I can get rid of half of that combo, move it on, or I can just focus down Azula until maybe something a little bit more easy comes into play, and that's easy street then. If like later on in the game you get, say, like this combo, that's so easy to manage, and now I can be like, I don't need to really worry about this. I can focus on maybe moving the tracking back down right to the beginning, advance through maybe all the objectives while we're safe here, and just build up cards in my hand so I can quickly take out enemies. And then remember, these ones are at really low health, so we can just be like, boom, boom. These maybe get replaced with like the last cards or something like that. You know, we can quickly get rid of this, then maze the last enemy, and we're basically done. You kind of have to, it feels like, pick the game apart in that way to face the challenges here to a certain degree. Like, that point of just, because things can get very like oppressive in terms of like, you could be getting stunned like every second turn, you could be losing 2 or 3 cards from your hand, the tracker could start moving by like 3 or 4 every turn. Because if things can get to that crazy state, you have to take advantage when things are comfortable, like really, really heavily. And so you have to think about like, okay, how do I improve on this? And like a lot of the times what I was doing was like, Aang was going full on into the bending thing so he could draw cards in his own turn. I was buying a lot of cards for Katara that was allowing everyone to draw cards, so that I would have these really big power play turns for Aang where he'd have like 8 or 9 cards in his hand, and he'd be able to just like later on in the game, Combustion Man comes out and here's like 8 damage in 1 turn, and I'm doing a lot to the objectives. Just getting to that point, because again, it's the difference between the power level of your starter deck versus like even like just from the beginner boxes, like even the difference between like attacking them with starter deck cards versus say like your hand consists of like say that stuff from the first 2 boxes, and it's like +2/+2, there's a 3/4, 4/4, all heroes draw a card, heal 1, and extra damage, so that's 5 damage, that's like 6 stuff, and then like your other card, maybe you get Lychee Nuts, and you're doing like 6-7 damage, and you have enough to buy a 6 cost card, and you've drawn a card, and you've moved the tracker back by 1. That's a big thing of just being able to sort of stabilize the game until your deck gets powerful enough to where you can have a pretty nice output. And that's a big thing with the game, I would say, just in terms of that. It does mean you almost have to sort of like, it feels like you're almost like gaming the system a little bit. But if you try to be overly fair, I think you can have a really bad time at the start of box 5, 6, and 7. Thankfully, the objective cards in box 7 are not that bad. 6 is far and away the worst box. The objectives in box 7 are a lot easier and more fair in my mind, so just be aware of that. But yeah, I'm going to wrap up the video there. This is definitely the time where, like, if you do have any other questions about the game, let me know in the comments below. But I think otherwise that brings the series on this deck building game to a conclusion. I would definitely say if you like deck building games, board games, avatar cards and stuff like that. I really like this game. I think it is really good. It's not super complicated, but definitely for some of these later boxes, and I would even say like the box like 3, 4 as well. There's a bit of strategy to it. Like, it takes a while. Like, getting through like 9, 10 adversaries, the game ends up lasting quite a while. Like, you'll note in my playthrough last time out, I think I added like 10, 12 cards to the deck. You get to a situation where you're maybe buying like 20 cards in a game later on. And so it is a proper deck builder here, where you end up with a proper deck, and you can do interesting combos of cards. So the later boxes especially, I think the gameplay actually gets quite good. So I recommend it as just an all-in-one box, and I'd really like to know if they plan to do like an additional thing, like a Cora box that you can maybe add in, play on its own, combine. That sort of stuff would be very cool to see. But otherwise, that's the end of the series. Thanks for watching, and bye.